There is something most of us figured out about money the same way we learned to drive, in pieces, from whoever happened to be around, picking up habits we never fully examined. And somewhere along the way, a number entered the picture, a 3-digit number. And without anyone sitting us down to explain it, that number quietly became a measure of how well we were doing as adults. That's where the confusion starts. Not with malice, not with a conspiracy, with something more ordinary and more durable than either of those things. A system that serves one purpose being mistaken for a system that serves a completely different one. This video is about understanding the difference, because that difference for most people is worth more than any single financial decision they'll ever make. Let's start from the beginning. Money is not just the paper in your wallet or the digits in your checking account. It is, at its core, a shared agreement. A tool that allows strangers to exchange value without knowing each other, without bartering, without trust built over years. Before money, you needed something the other person wanted. With money, you just need something everyone agrees has value. That agreement, that collective fiction, enforced by law and habit and sheer scale, is what makes modern economies possible. But money as a tool doesn't operate in a vacuum. It operates inside a structure, a set of rules, institutions, incentives, and measurements that shape how money moves, who it moves toward, and under what conditions. Most people never learn that structure. They interact with money the way most of us interact with electricity. We use it without understanding how it gets to us or what happens when the wiring is wrong. The hidden architecture of that system governs more of ordinary life than most people realize. And the credit score is one of its most consequential and most misunderstood pieces. To understand what a credit score actually is, you have to start with a simple question: who is it for? It is not for you. Not primarily. A credit score is a risk metric built for lenders. Its function is to answer a specific, narrow question. Given this person's history of borrowing and repaying money, how likely are they to repay a new loan on time? That's it. That is the full scope of what it was designed to measure. It is a prediction, a statistical inference, a way for institutions to make decisions quickly, at scale, about people they have never met. Understanding that single fact changes everything. A score is not a grade. It is not a measure of your character, your intelligence, or your financial wisdom. A person who has never borrowed money in their life, someone who pays cash for everything, who saves diligently, who has accumulated genuine wealth, can have a low credit score or no score at all because they have given the system very little data to work with. Meanwhile, someone who carries a balance on several credit cards, services a car loan, and keeps an old credit card open for the utilization calculation can have an excellent score while holding almost no assets. Those two people are in opposite financial positions. The scoring system would rank them in reverse order. This is not a glitch. It's what the system was built to do. The history here matters because it explains why things ended up this way. Before the 1970s, lending decisions in the United States were deeply informal and deeply unequal. A loan officer at a local bank would sit across from someone and make a judgment call. That judgment was influenced by character, reputation, and routinely by race, gender, and social connections in ways that had nothing to do with creditworthiness. The process was opaque, the outcomes were discriminatory, and there was essentially no recourse for someone who was denied unfairly. The Fair Credit Reporting Act of 1970 was a genuine attempt to fix some of that. It created rules around how consumer credit data could be collected, used, and disputed. It gave people the right to see their own credit files. It was, in its intent, a consumer protection law. But regulation created standardization, and standardization created a market. Credit bureaus, private companies, began collecting and selling consumer financial data at scale. And eventually, a scoring model built by a company called Fair Isaac Corporation became the dominant way lenders converted that raw data into a single, usable number. The FICO score. Not a government measure, not a neutral public utility. A private product, licensed to lenders, optimized for lender needs. Over the following decades, this number spread far beyond mortgage underwriting and consumer credit. Landlords started using it to screen tenants. Insurance companies found that it correlated with claim rates and began factoring it into pricing. Employers in certain industries started reviewing it during hiring. Utilities started using it to determine whether you'd owe a deposit for electricity or water. A number built for one narrow purpose had become something much broader. And without anyone explaining what it actually measured, most people absorbed it as a general-purpose verdict on their financial lives. That absorption is where the psychological trap lives. At some point, through parents, through culture, through sheer repetition, many people came to understand that a good credit score meant they were doing well. That building their score was the responsible, adult thing to do. That credit cards used wisely, paid on time, kept at the right balance, were a cornerstone of financial maturity. The result is that a generation of people learn to optimize for a lender-facing metric as though it were a personal wealth metric. Those are not the same game. And playing the wrong game, even playing it brilliantly, does not get you to the right destination. Think about what it actually feels like to pay off a debt. There's a real sense of accomplishment. People celebrate it, and they should. It takes discipline, often sacrifice, sometimes years. But notice what's true the moment that final payment clears. You are back to zero. You do not have that money. It went to the creditor plus interest. You spent years running hard to return to the starting line. That's not cynicism. It's just arithmetic. And recognizing it isn't about feeling bad. It's about understanding what you're actually doing when you borrow and repay versus when you build. Managing debt is not the same as building wealth. Zero is not an asset. Now look at the specific behaviors the scoring model rewards. Keeping your credit utilization low, that is, the percentage of available credit you're using at any given time, is one of the strongest levers in your score. Keeping old accounts open, even if you never use them, helps your average account age. Having a mix of credit types, revolving accounts, installment loans, can improve your score. Opening too many new accounts at once hurts it. None of these behaviors, on their own, make you wealthier. Some of them actively cost money. Interest, fees, the subtle cost of carrying a balance you don't need to carry. They are tactics for managing the perception of risk from a lender's standpoint. They are not the same as accumulating assets, reducing expenses, or investing the difference. The system doesn't pretend otherwise. It was never designed to build your wealth. It was designed to assess your likelihood of servicing debt. The confusion is ours. The cost of the confusion is real. And the score's reach into daily life makes that cost particularly hard to escape. If you've rented an apartment recently, there's a good chance your application was screened at least partly by credit score. Landlords use it as a proxy for reliability. Not because it measures reliability directly, but because it's fast, it's cheap, and it correlates statistically with outcomes they care about.
First,
A low
we have the
score
bank,
or a thin credit file
then the
can mean
medical
denial,
institution,
or a higher
and
deposit,
finally,
or a
the
shorter lease
education
term.
sector.
In a tight housing market, this can meaningfully limit your options. Auto insurance pricing in many states uses a credit-based insurance score, a variant of the standard model, to estimate how likely you are to file a claim. The correlation is empirical. The mechanism isn't fully understood, but the practical effect is that someone with a thin or damaged credit file can pay more for the same coverage than someone with identical driving history but a stronger score. Certain employers, particularly in finance, government contracting, and positions with access to sensitive systems, review credit reports as part of background checks. Not the score itself, usually, but the underlying data. Late payments, collections, high debt loads. The logic is that financial stress correlates with certain risks. Whether that logic is sound is a separate question. What matters here is that the data exists, it flows widely, and its reach was never fully communicated to the people it describes. This is not a story about villains. It's a story about how a tool built for one context gets adopted by adjacent contexts, because it's available and it works well enough. Each institution that uses the score is making a rational local decision. The aggregate effect on individuals is something no single institution fully accounts for. And for individuals who don't understand the system, the consequences compound quietly. Let me show you what that looks like in practice. Picture someone living in Seattle, software engineer, makes around $140,000 a year before taxes. By almost any popular measure of success, they're doing well. College educated, employed, earning a wage that puts them comfortably in the top quarter of American earners. They have a good credit score, excellent even. They pay their cards on time. They have a car loan they're managing well. They've been told they have great credit, and they believe it, not as vanity, but because they've absorbed the idea that a high score means financial health. But here's the balance sheet. Rent in their neighborhood runs $1,700 a month for a modest one-bedroom. They have $60,000 in student loans, a decade-old decision that felt reasonable at 18. The car loan is mid-range. Monthly payments sit around $450. They eat out more than they should because the hours are long and cooking feels like one more thing. They contribute just enough to their employer's retirement plan to get the match, which is good, genuinely good, but they've never increased that contribution. They tell themselves they'll start investing seriously once they feel more stable. They feel stretched, not desperate, but stretched. And they can't quite explain why, because the number looks right. The score is high. The salary is real. What they haven't been given is the framework to see it clearly. High income is not wealth. High income with high fixed costs and no accumulating assets is a treadmill. A fast treadmill. Exhausting, impressive looking, but still a treadmill. Their credit score says they are a reliable borrower. It does not say whether they are building anything. It was never designed to. It's worth being fair here. The credit scoring system is not simply a trap. It solves a real problem, and it solves it reasonably well. Before standardized scoring, lending decisions were slower, more expensive, and deeply subject to human bias. A consistent, data-driven model made credit access faster and, in some measurable ways, more equitable. At least within the populations it tracked. Someone moving to a new city without local connections could still get a car loan. A first-generation borrower without family wealth or community standing could be evaluated on their own history, however short. The speed and consistency the score provides is genuinely valuable. When an institution needs to process thousands of applications, a standardized number removes at least some of the room for arbitrary discrimination. It also creates access. For people who want to borrow for something meaningful, a small business, a home, a period of education, having a credit history makes that process dramatically easier. The system rewards people who engage with it. That's a real benefit to people who understand the rules. The problem isn't that the system exists. The problem is what it gets mistaken for. Because the score is also opaque. The exact formula is proprietary. The weighting of factors isn't fully disclosed. Two people with similar financial histories can have meaningfully different scores without understanding why. And because bureaus depend on data submitted by creditors, who are not legally required to report, the system contains gaps and inaccuracies that affect real people without clear recourse. The incentive structure, too, deserves attention. Bureaus are paid primarily by the lenders who subscribe to their data. The consumer is the subject of the data, but not the primary customer. When the interests of those two parties diverge, and sometimes they do, the system is structured to serve the lender's perspective first. None of this makes the system evil. It makes it a business, and like any business, it behaves consistently with its incentives. What it means for you is that understanding the system clearly, not resentfully but clearly, is the beginning of navigating it well. Here is the simplest mental model for this. The credit score and your financial life are two separate games. They overlap, but they are not the same game. Managing one is not the same as winning the other. The credit game is about lender relationships, low utilization, consistent payments, account longevity, a manageable debt load. The rules are narrow. The feedback is numerical. The reward is access. The ability to borrow at favorable terms when you choose to. The wealth game is entirely different. It is about the relationship between what you own and what you owe, about whether the distance between those two numbers is growing over time. It involves income, yes, but more importantly, it involves the gap between income and spending, and what you do with that gap. Assets that grow, liabilities that shrink, time as a resource rather than just a pressure. A high credit score can help you in the wealth game. Lower interest rates on a mortgage, for instance, can mean meaningful savings over 30 years. But the score alone tells you nothing about whether you are building anything. It cannot see your savings rate. It cannot see whether you own appreciating assets. It cannot see whether you are genuinely financially resilient, meaning you could absorb a setback without disaster. You can have a perfect score and a fragile financial life. You can have a thin credit file and a deeply stable one. The score is one instrument in a dashboard that most people haven't been shown. Once you can see the full dashboard, the score takes its proper place. Useful, limited, and not to be confused with the destination. The people who built the system understood this. The institutions that use it understand this. The piece that was missing was your understanding of it. And now you have it. That is what a lot of financial literacy actually is. Not secrets, not formulas, but structural clarity. Understanding what each tool is for. Understanding whose interests shaped each system. Understanding that a metric designed to help a lender assess your borrowing risk is not a verdict on your life. Once you hold that clearly, a lot of the anxiety that surrounds money, the feeling that you're always slightly behind, that you're following rules nobody explained, that anxiety starts to ease. Not because the system changes, because you're no longer confused about what you're playing. Most of what remains is a matter of direction. There is a great deal more to explore. How interest compounds across a lifetime, how institutional savings vehicles were built and what they were built to do, how insurance and housing and taxes all represent versions of the same structural story. Systems with specific incentives that most people encounter without a map. If you'd like to keep understanding those systems, this channel is built for exactly that. There's no hype here. No urgency tactics. Just the next piece of the map whenever you're ready for it.